welcome back. Now, Chinese People's Liberation Army has urged India to strictly restrain its frontline forces in the border areas.
In a statement, the Western Theatre Command of PLA said Delhi's provocative actions on Monday led to clashes in the Galwan Valley. The PLA spokesperson urged India to return to the right track and properly manage disputes. He said the valley has always been Chinese territory and Indian troops seriously violated the agreements on border issues. Chinese Foreign Minister spokesman Zhao Lian said it does not want to see any more clashes on the border with India. Zhao reiterated that China is not to be blamed for the clashes and said the overall situation at the border is stable and controllable. Meanwhile, in a statement, Delhi confirmed that Indian and Chinese troops have disengaged at Galwan area. It added that the military remains committed to protecting the territorial integrity and sovereignty of India.
And the People's Liberation Army's Tibet Military Command has conducted joint exercises in Yangqing Tangula Mountains. This comes after 20 Indians were killed in a clash at the Ladakh border on Monday. The drills were conducted at an elevation of 4,700 meters and featured long-range artillery systems, ground-to-air missile systems and special operative forces. China's defense ministry says advanced weapons, including Type 15 lightweight tanks, were also used in the exercises. Army aviation troops, electronic countermeasure forces and engineering and anti-chemical warfare troops also joined the exercises. The drill simulated a strike operation on hostile hubs from multiple dimensions and trained the high-elevation troops' joint operation capabilities. A brigade commander, Zhang Zhilialin, said the drills laid a solid foundation for the troops to conduct all kinds of missions. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has expressed concern over reports of violence at the line of actual control between India and China. Guterres has urged both sides to exercise maximum restraint. Erica Neko, the associate spokesperson for the UN Secretary-General, said there are positive reports that the two countries have engaged to de-escalate the situation. Meanwhile, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said Hindutva ideology is to be blamed for the current conflict. Qureshi said Beijing tried to resolve the border dispute, but Delhi continued construction in the disputed area. He said both China and Pakistan are opposed to India's illegal annexation of Kashmir in August last year. Meanwhile, Washington says it's closely monitoring the dispute. In a statement, the State Department said it supports the desire to de-escalate expressed by both India and China. UN Chief Antonio Guterres has shown concern over the child casualties in Indian-occupied Kashmir. In a report, Guterres called upon the Indian government to take preventive measures to protect children by ending the usage of pellet guns. The report said the United Nations has verified the killing of 8 children by Indian troops in the occupied valley. It also urged the Indian government to immediately release 68 children, which were detained by occupation forces. The report said that the UN has verified over 25,000 grave violations against children globally from January to December 2019. Now, Pakistan has recorded its highest one-day deaths by the COVID-19 as 136 people lost their lives. The death toll has now risen to 2,975. The health ministry says more than 5,800 cases were reported in the last day. The number of total infections has now crossed 154,000. Officials said more than 58,000 patients have recovered so far, while there are over 93,000 active cases in the country. The ministry said Punjab province has reported more than 58,000 cases and Sindh has recorded more than 57,000. There are some 19,000 infections in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and more than 8,000 in Balochistan. The capital, Islamabad, has reported over 9,000 cases, while Gilgit-Baltistan and Azad Jammu and Kashmir have reported nearly 1,900 cases. Brazil has registered a record 34,918 COVID-19 cases in a day, while nearly 1,300 people died as the country's death toll crossed 45,000. While in the US, 840 more people lost their lives in the past 24 hours as the toll surged to nearly 117,000. Meanwhile, the global COVID-19 death count has crossed 441,000 with more than 8.1 million infections. More in this report.
As COVID-19 cases soar, the US has now lost more lives to the new coronavirus than the American deaths toll in World War I. In China, Beijing has shut all schools and cancelled over 1,200 flights amid fears of a second wave.
The situation of the outbreak has become extremely severe. Therefore, under the guidance of the expert team from the National Health Commission, we have recently organized experts to assess the development of the outbreak. According to the leading group for COVID-19 prevention and control in Beijing, we, after applying for approval in line with procedure, decided to raise the emergency response in Beijing from the 3rd level to the 2nd level, starting from this moment on June 16th.
In Europe, most of the countries have begun to ease lockdown restrictions and establish travel corridors. The UK's Prime Minister Boris Johnson says London seeks unrestricted travel to Spain and France as soon as possible.
Just to say, obviously, I'll be talking to Emmanuel Macron about all sorts of ways in which we can bring our countries together, making sure that we eventually will be able to travel freely to and from each other's countries. Same goes obviously for Spain as soon as we can. The reason for having the quarantine system is very simple. We don't want to re-import the disease.
Meanwhile, New Zealand has deployed military to oversee the quarantine facilities and strengthen border checks after 2 new cases.
This case represents an unacceptable failure of the system. It should never have happened, and it cannot be repeated. From the beginning, we have taken an extraordinarily cautious approach at the border. That is why we have required every returning New Zealander to go into a facility that we manage.
Meanwhile, Mexico has reported almost 4,600 new infections along with 730 fatalities in past 24 hours. In Honduras, President Juan Orlando Hernandez has been diagnosed with the coronavirus.
Moving on, Kabul says 12 members of Afghan National Defense Forces have been killed in Taliban attacks in the country's northern Jawzjan province. A spokesman for Jawzjan governor said 5 others were wounded in the attack on 2 security checkpoints in Akcha district. He said 5 Taliban fighters were also killed and 10 others wounded in the clashes. The spokesperson said the Taliban have also taken 4 security personnel captive. The Taliban have neither confirmed or denied the raids. The Taliban say they have released 3 more Afghan soldiers in Kabul and Helmand provinces. Taliban spokesperson Suhail Shaheen said the wounded soldiers were set free on humanitarian grounds and as a goodwill gesture. In a tweet, Shaheen said the freed soldiers were sent to their families for medical treatment after giving them the usual assistance. The Taliban and Kabul administration agreed to free each other's prisoners under the Doha peace deal in February. Meanwhile, the US, Russia and Afghan government expressed satisfaction over the release of inmates to kickstart the intra-Afghan negotiations. The United States has imposed punishing new sanctions on Syria that aim to further weaken the government of President Bashar al-Assad. In a tweet, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said 39 designations will target the Damascus government, including Assad and his wife. Pompeo said more sanctions will come until the Assad regime stops the brutal war and agrees to a political solution. But there are fears that the sanctions will make the plight of ordinary Syrians even more desperate. Meanwhile, the uncle of Syrian president has been sentenced to 4 years in prison by a French court for laundering money. Rifat al-Assad was convicted of embezzling Syrian state funds to buy homes and offices worth £76 million. The court ruled his assets in Paris and London will be seized. Moving on, Turkey says it has launched Operation Claw Tiger against the Kurdish militants in northern Iraq. The Defense Ministry said Turkish forces are in the Haftanin region to operate against Kurdish worker parties, fighters and other terrorist groups. The ministry said the special forces, along with surveillance and attack drones, have entered the region for an air operation. It said the latest operation is being carried out as part of Turkey's legitimate defense rights as per the international law. Operation Claw Tiger is a follow-up operation of Claw Eagle that Turkey started on Monday. Ankara had claimed destroying 81 targets of the Kurdistan Workers' Party in that operation. Turkey holds the PKK responsible for the deaths of some 40,000 people in a 30-year terror campaign. Meanwhile, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says Ankara, Moscow and Tehran have agreed to hold dialogue on the Syrian settlement. He said the presidents of the three countries will speak on video conference and later hold a summit in Tehran. Lavrov made the announcement following a meeting with his Iranian counterpart Javad Zarif. The Russian Foreign Minister said video conference may take place before a gathering of the Syrian Constitutional Committee. Lavrov said Russia's approach to the Syrian conflict can also be applied to Libya. He said Moscow is making efforts to convince the Libyan warring sides to start negotiations. Zarif said Tehran supports Russian and Turkish efforts in the country to end the conflict. Libyan Prime Minister Fayez al-Sarraj has urged the UN to provide technical assistance in documenting evidence of crimes committed by Khalifa Haftar. In a message to the UN Libya mission, al-Sarraj called for probing the crimes and violations committed in Tripoli and Tarhuna. Al-Sarraj said Haftar's militias should be investigated and held accountable. Libya's government of national accord has regained control of the capital Tripoli and Tarhuna from Haftar's forces. Now, Lebanon's Hezbollah has accused the U.S. of preventing dollars from reaching the crisis-hit country. In a televised address, the group's chief, Hassan Nasrallah, said dollar injections were needed to shore up Lebanon's pound currency. Nasrallah said the dollar shortage has worsened, resulting in record price hikes. On the ongoing IMF talks, Nasrallah said they could take months and up to a year.
There is proven information that the Americans are preventing the necessary amounts of US dollars from reaching Lebanon. We will say why later on. Secondly, the Americans are pressuring and intervening on the central bank to forbid them to inject the necessary amount of dollars in the markets.
Nasrallah also slammed Washington over its sanctions on Syria, saying the US aims to starve the country. Now, the U.S. has called on world powers to demand Iran to cooperate with the International Atomic Energy Agency. In a tweet, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said Iran's unprecedented obstruction is deeply concerning and unacceptable. Pompeo's remarks come after the Atomic Agency expressed concern over Tehran's denial of giving access to its nuclear site. The agency called on Iran to cooperate immediately with the forum. Meanwhile, U.S. envoy for Iran Brian Hook has called for an open-ended arms embargo on Tehran. He said Washington believes an extension of an arms embargo should be done indefinitely without a fixed date. More news coming up after a short break. Stay tuned. Saudi Arabia has called on the international community to act against Israel to stop its aggressive behavior that threatens regional stability. In a statement, Media Minister Majid al-Kassabi said the cabinet reaffirmed kingdom's rejection of Israeli plans to annex Palestinian territories. The statement said the cabinet called for a unified Islamic position against Israel's blatant violations of international resolutions. The cabinet also slammed Yemen's Houthi rebels for firing ballistic missiles and using drones to target civilians in the country. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia-led coalition fighting in Yemen has asked the UN to provide details of the children killed in Yemen. Yesterday, the UN accused that the coalition was responsible for killing 222 children last year. The UAE says it can work with Israel on some areas while still having political differences with the state. Speaking at a virtual conference, Foreign Affairs State Minister Anwar Gargash said the two countries can work on tech and COVID-19 fight. Gargash said communication with Israel was important and will yield better results than other routes taken in the past. He said the UAE is against any annexation as being proposed by the Israeli government.
We say we disagree with you on this. We don't think it's a good idea. But at the same time, there are areas such as COVID, technology, and other things that we can actually work together.
Well, Israel has no diplomatic relations with Gulf Arab countries, but common concerns over Iran's regional influence have led to a limited thaw in the tide. Now moving to North Korea, which has rejected South Korea's offer to send special envoys to ease escalating tensions and vowed to redeploy troops on border areas. North Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un's sister Kim Yo-jong said Pyongyang has flatly rejected the sinister proposal.
She also accused South Korea's President Moon Jae-in of being an American puppet and blamed him for failing the 2018 pacts. Meanwhile, South Korea's President Moon Jae-in has met with a group of former unification ministers to discuss the latest escalations with North Korea. Earlier, Seoul slammed the criticism directed at Moon, while the military has warned Pyongyang of stern response if it resorts to military action. In a statement, Seoul's Joint Chiefs of Staff said Pyongyang will pay the price if it impedes two-decade-long efforts for peace in the Korean peninsula. The statement came hours after Pyongyang said it will redeploy troops to Mount Kumgang and Kaesong near the border. Meanwhile, the US urged North Korea to refrain from taking further counterproductive actions after it blew up a liaison office over anti-Pyongyang leaflets.
Now into the US, the protesters have continued to demand police reform and abolishment of monuments honoring racist, pro-slavery and colonial figures. A statue of Christopher Columbus in St. Louis has become the latest monument to be taken down in protest against the killing of an unarmed black man, George Floyd. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump has signed an executive order aimed at improving police practices, saying Americans demand law and order. In the US Capitol, senators debated a legislation that concentrates more on data collection than on policy changes with regards to the use of lethal force. Democratic senators branded Trump's executive order as insufficient, saying the measure fell short of holding rule-breaking police officers accountable. But Trump opposed widespread demand of defunding and replacing the police with community initiatives.
As part of this new credentialing process, chokeholds will be banned, except if an officer's life is at risk. And I will say we've dealt with all of the various departments, and everybody said, it's time. We have to do it. Additionally, we're looking at new advanced and powerful, less lethal weapons to help prevent deadly interactions. New devices are being developed all the time, and we're looking at the best of them. And cost is no object, no object. Under this executive order, departments will also need a share of information about credible abuses so that officers with significant issues do not simply move from one police department to the next.
Pakistan's legendary actor, anchor person and politician Tariq Aziz has died at the age of 84 after protracted illness in Lahore city.
पाकिस्तान टेलीविजन सर्विस की जानिब से तारिक अजीज आपसे मुखातिब है।
Tariq Aziz was the first male television announcer of Pakistan's history. He hosted the longest-running live quiz show in the country's history by the name of Nilam Gar and later Tariq Aziz Show. The show was first aired on Pakistan television in 1974. Aziz also acted in films and dramas and also presented news for some time. The legendary artist also worked for Pakistan Broadcasting Corporation and was considered a maestro voiceover artist. Prime Minister Imran Khan, politicians, showbiz industry notables, and his massive fan base have mourned the death of the legendary artist. Aziz was also elected as a member of Pakistan's National Assembly in 1997. He was bestowed upon with Presidential Pride of Performance Award in 1992 for his invaluable services. In the business stories, the U.S. Commerce Department says American companies will work with Chinese technology company Huawei on setting standards for 5G networks.
In a statement, Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross said the US will not cede leadership in global innovation. He said this action recognizes the importance of harnessing American ingenuity to protect its economic and national security. Huawei has welcomed the decision, saying it will continue to hold sincere discussions with its counterpart. The Chinese telecom giant was put on a US blacklist in May 2019, which restricts the firm from doing business with Huawei. Now let's have a look at the weather updates. Well, that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can always follow us on social media at indus.news. Take care.